The WarHFY Dominion had conquered 1,200 species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and in 8,000 years of expansion, not a single world had ever refused their demand for surrender. High Arbiter Keseth stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Submission, and watched the blue planet rotating slowly beneath him. He found it beautiful in a primitive sort of way, covered in water and green land masses, and swirling white clouds that reminded him of worlds he had crushed centuries ago. "Begin the submission protocol," he ordered, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The transmission beam activated, and in every language spoken on the planet below, the message went out: "Kneel before the WarHFY Dominion. Serve our eternal empire, and your species will be permitted to exist. Resist, and you will be erased from the memory of the universe." Keseth had delivered this message to hundreds of worlds, and he knew exactly what would happen next. The leaders of this primitive species called humanity would gather in their capitals. They would study the size of his fleet. They would calculate the power of his weapons. And they would realize that resistance meant extinction. Mathematics always won in the end, and every species eventually understood this simple truth. He gave them 48 hours to respond, which was generous by Dominion standards. Most species surrendered within 12. The response came exactly at the deadline, but it was not what Keseth expected. Instead of surrender codes and groveling pleas for mercy, his communication officer received a single message from something calling itself the Terran Psychological Operations Collective. The message was short and strange, stating simply that humanity did not negotiate with bullies, but they did study them. Keseth read the message 3 times, and then he began to laugh. His bridge crew joined him, because the idea of this tiny species, with their primitive rockets and nuclear weapons, threatening the greatest military force in galactic history, was genuinely amusing. "They need a demonstration," Keseth said, still chuckling as he pointed to a coastal city on the planet's surface. "Destroy that one. Make it visible from orbit so they understand what they are dealing with." The plasma bombardment lasted exactly 30 seconds, and when it was over, a city of 3 million people had become a crater of glass and ash. Keseth waited for the surrender that would surely follow. Instead, something strange began happening aboard his ships. It started small, with crew members reporting odd sounds in empty quarters. Whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, speaking in languages that the universal translators could not identify. At first, the officers dismissed these reports as stress and imagination, because space was vast and dark, and it played tricks on the mind. But then the images began appearing. A weapons officer named Kroth found himself staring at his personal data tablet, frozen in horror as images of his homeworld burning filled the screen. He had not accessed any such files, and when he tried to delete them, they multiplied, showing his family's dwelling consumed by flames, showing his childhood friends screaming as fire rained from the sky. He ran to his commander to report the malfunction, but his commander was experiencing something similar. Her screen showed documents marked with the highest security classifications, documents that detailed secret purges and massacres that the Dominion had ordered against its own client species. "This is impossible," she whispered. "These files are stored in the central archive on the homeworld. No one could access them from here. But someone had accessed them, and that someone was broadcasting them to every screen on every ship in the fleet." In a bunker deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, Tiara Mara Chun watched the chaos unfold through hacked Dominion camera feeds. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her black hair and tired eyes that had not seen proper sleep in weeks. But right now she was smiling. "Phase 1 is working," she said to her team, a collection of the strangest experts humanity had ever assembled. There were psychologists who specialized in alien cognition, hackers who had spent their careers breaking into systems that were supposed to be unbreakable, military strategists who had studied every war in human history, and science fiction writers who had spent decades imagining how alien minds might work. The micro-drones we seeded into their communication systems during the initial broadcast are performing exactly as designed, reported a young man named James, his fingers flying across holographic keyboards as he monitored data streams from orbit. We now have access to 63% of their internal network, and that number is growing every hour. Dayer-chan nodded and turned to address her full team. Listen carefully, she said. We cannot defeat them with weapons. Their ships are too powerful, their numbers too great, and their technology too advanced. If we try to fight them directly, we will lose, and humanity will become just another conquered species in their collection. She paused and looked at the images of the Dominion fleet filling the main screen. But every empire has a weakness, she continued. The Dominion has conquered for 8,000 years because every species they encounter calculates the odds and decides to surrender. They have never faced a species that refuses to do that math. They have never faced a species that fights back with weapons they cannot see or understand. What weapons? Asked a general who had joined the team just days ago, still skeptical of this strange civilian operation. Dayer-chan smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression. Fear, she said. Doubt. Confusion. Guilt. These are the weapons we will use against them. We cannot destroy their ships, but we can destroy their certainty. We cannot kill their soldiers, but we can make them question why they are fighting. High above the earth, on the bridge of the eternal submission, High Arbiter Keseth was beginning to feel something he had not experienced in 300 years of conquest. He was beginning to feel afraid. The whispers had reached his personal quarters now, speaking to him in the voice of his dead mentor, asking him questions he could not answer. Why do you conquer, Keseth? What are you building? What legacy will you leave? How many species have you erased? Do you even remember their names? He tried to silence the voices by destroying his personal devices, but they came from the walls themselves, from the very metal of his ship. The humans had done something no conquered species had ever done before. They had found a way inside his fleet, inside his network, inside his soldiers' minds. And they were just getting started. Admiral Yeftara had served the Dominion for 400 years, and in all that time, she had never seen anything like what was happening to her fleet. She stood in the medical bay of her cruiser, the Absolute Dominance, and watched as doctors sedated another screaming soldier. This was the 47th case today, and the reports from other ships suggested that thousands more were suffering from the same mysterious condition. What is happening to them? She demanded. The chief medical officer, a thin creature with 6 eyes and trembling hands, pulled up the diagnostic readout on his screen. They are not sleeping properly, Admiral, he explained, his voice shaking. Something is invading their dream cycles. When they enter deep sleep, they experience vivid nightmares that feel completely real. They see their homeworlds destroyed, their families killed, their deepest fears brought to life in perfect detail. That is impossible, Yeftara snapped. Dreams cannot be controlled by external forces. But even as she said the words, she knew they were wrong. The humans had somehow found a way to hack into the neural implants that every Dominion soldier carried. The same implants that allowed for instant communication and translation across species. Those implants connected directly to the brain, and the humans had figured out how to use them as doorways into the sleeping mind. In the Swiss bunker, Dr. Chun was coordinating what her team had begun calling the Whisper Campaign. We need to personalize the messages, she told her psychological warfare specialists. Generic nightmares will scare them, but personalized ones will break them. I want every soldier to feel like we know them, like we can see into their souls. How do we personalize messages for millions of alien soldiers? Asked Dr. Reyes, a specialist in trauma psychology, who had spent 20 years treating war veterans. "We use their own data against them," Dr. Chun replied. "Every soldier in that fleet has a personal file stored in their network. We have access to those files now. We know their names, their home planets, their families, their psychological evaluations, their fears and weaknesses." She pulled up a holographic display showing the face of a young Dominion officer. "This is Lieutenant Krath," she said. "His psychological profile shows that he has deep anxiety about his family's safety. His father was killed in a mining accident when he was young, and he has recurring nightmares about losing his mother in a similar way. Tonight, we will send him a dream about exactly that." Dyrayes looked uncomfortable. "This feels cruel," he said. "We are torturing them through their dreams." Dr. Chun's expression hardened. "They destroyed a city of 3 million people to make a point," she said quietly. 3 million innocent people burned to ash because we refused to kneel. I will do whatever is necessary to stop them from doing it again. If that means giving their soldiers bad dreams, then I can live with that." The Whisper campaign intensified over the following weeks. Every night, Dominion soldiers experienced personalized nightmares that left them exhausted and afraid. They began to dread sleep itself, staying awake for days until their bodies collapsed from exhaustion, only to wake up screaming hours later. But the nightmares were only part of the strategy. The humans also began broadcasting what they called the truth files. These were documents and recordings that the Dominion had kept secret for centuries, evidence of atrocities that had been hidden from ordinary soldiers and citizens. There were records of entire species exterminated, not for rebellion, but simply because they occupied territory that the Dominion wanted. There were files showing that high-ranking officers lived in luxury, while frontier soldiers died in forgotten wars. There were recordings of Dominion leaders laughing about the lives they had destroyed. Much of this information was real, simply classified at the highest levels. The humans had found it buried in the stolen data and decided to share it with everyone. A young soldier named Korvax, conscripted from a client species called Denethri, received a file that changed everything he believed. The file showed that his entire species had been conquered not through honorable warfare, but through biological weapons. The Dominion had released a plague on his homeworld that killed 90% of the population, and then they had arrived as saviors, offering medicine and protection in exchange for eternal loyalty. Everything Korvax had been taught about his people's grateful alliance with the Dominion was a lie. He showed the file to his bunkmate, who showed it to his commander, who showed it to her captain. Within days, the information had spread through the entire ship, and soldiers who had spent their whole lives believing they served a noble empire began to wonder if they were actually the villains in someone else's story. High Arbiter Keseth tried to stop the flow of information by ordering all external communications severed. He commanded his officers to destroy any personal devices that received unauthorized transmissions. He threatened execution for anyone caught spreading enemy propaganda. But the whispers continued. The humans had hidden their micro-drones throughout the fleet, tiny machines smaller than dust particles that could transmit directly into the walls and floors and ceilings of every ship. The messages seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and no amount of searching could find their source. "Why do we fight?" the whispers asked in the darkness of sleeping quarters. "Who benefits from our conquest?" They wandered through the corridors of warships. "Have you ever questioned your orders?" They suggested in the ears of officers who were beginning to question everything. The first mutiny happened 6 weeks into the occupation. A supply ship called the Dutiful Servant refused orders to return to the main fleet. Its captain, a veteran of 30 campaigns, announced over open channels that she could no longer serve an empire built on lies and blood. She took her ship and her crew and fled into deep space, broadcasting a message encouraging others to do the same. Keseth had the ship tracked and destroyed, but by then, it was too late. The idea had been planted, and ideas were harder to kill than people. On Earth, Dr. Chun watched the mutiny and its aftermath through hacked cameras, and she knew that they were winning. Not through weapons or warfare, but through something far more powerful. They were winning through doubt. Phase 2 is complete, she told her team. They are questioning themselves now. They are wondering if their empire is worth dying for. Next, we need to give them a reason to stop fighting entirely. She looked at the faces of her exhausted team. These strange heroes who fought with words and images instead of guns and bombs. It is time to show them what humanity really is, she said. It is time to show them kindness. The Dominion had always believed that kindness was weakness, that mercy was a flaw, and that the only language the universe understood was force. This belief had carried them through 8,000 years of conquest and made them the most feared power in the galaxy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the occupied territories of Earth, human resistance cells began a campaign that confused and bemused the Vice Dominion soldiers more than any nightmare or propaganda broadcast ever could. They began being nice. Private Tessic was a young soldier from a warrior species called the Kreth, raised from birth to believe that all aliens were enemies to be conquered or slaves to be controlled. He had been stationed in a human city to maintain order, and he expected the humans to fear him, to run from him, to treat him like the monster his training had made him. Instead, a small human woman with gray hair walked up to him on his second day of patrol and offered him a cup of hot liquid. "You look tired," she said with a warm smile. "This is called coffee. It helps with energy. I thought you might like some." Tessic stared at the cup in complete confusion. His training had not prepared him for this. Was it a trick? Was the drink poisoned? Why would an enemy offer him comfort? "I am your conqueror," he said, his voice uncertain. "Why would you give me anything?" The old woman shrugged. "You are also a person standing in the cold," she replied. "And where I come from, we take care of people, even people we disagree with. Drink the coffee or do not drink it. But know that you are welcome here, even if you do not feel like you should be." She walked away, leaving Tessic standing alone with a cup of coffee that suddenly felt heavier than his weapon. This scene repeated itself across the planet in thousands of different ways. Human children drew pictures for Dominion soldiers and asked them questions about their home planets. Human families invited patrol squads into their homes for meals and conversations. Human musicians played songs in public squares and invited alien soldiers to listen, not as enemies, but as audiences. "Why are they doing this?" demanded Captain WarHFY at a strategy meeting with his fellow officers. "We destroyed one of their cities. We killed millions of their people. They should hate us. They should be trying to kill us at every opportunity." "Maybe they are playing some kind of long game," suggested another officer. "Maybe the kindness is a trap." But it was not a trap, and deep down, the soldiers knew it. The humans had simply decided to treat their conquerors as people rather than monsters. And this simple act was destroying military discipline more effectively than any weapon could. In the Swiss bunker, Dr. Chun monitored reports from across the planet with grim satisfaction. "It is working," she said to General Morrison, the military liaison, who had finally accepted that this strange operation might actually succeed. "Their soldiers are not trained for this. They know how to respond to violence and rebellion and fear. They do not know how to respond to someone offering them a sandwich and asking about their childhood." "How is this supposed to win us the war?" Morrison asked, still struggling to understand the strategy. "It is not about winning a war," Dr. Chun explained. "It is about ending one. Every soldier who questions their mission is a soldier who might defect. Every officer who doubts their orders is an officer who might refuse them. We are not trying to defeat their army. We are trying to dissolve it from within." The defections began slowly at first. Private Korvax, the young Nethri soldier who had learned the truth about his species' conquest, was the first. He simply walked away from his patrol one night and turned himself over to a human-resistant cell, asking for asylum. "I do not want to fight anymore," he told the humans who found him. "I do not know what to believe anymore. Everything I was taught was a lie. I just want to rest. I just want to be somewhere where the whispers stop." The humans did not imprison him or torture him for information. Instead, they gave him a bed and food, and the chance to talk to people who listened without judgment. Within a week, Korvax was helping the Resistance by sharing information about Dominion operations, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to. Word of his defection spread through the occupation force like fire through dry grass. Other soldiers began to wonder if they could do the same. If the humans would treat them with the same kindness they had shown Korvax. If there was a way out of this war that did not involve dying for an empire they no longer believed in. High Arbiter Kesseth watched his occupation crumble and felt something close to panic. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. The conquered species was supposed to submit, not fight back with smiles and questions and coffee. His soldiers were supposed to be loyal, not confused and doubtful and sneaking away in the night. He made a decision that he believed would end the human threat once and for all. "Send a message to the homeworld," he ordered his communication officer. "Request immediate reinforcement. I want the second and third conquest fleets dispatched to the system. We will crush these humans with overwhelming force." In the bunker, Dr. Chun received word of the reinforcement request within hours, thanks to their access to Dominion communications. She gathered her team and smiled. "This is exactly what we wanted," she announced. The team stared at her in disbelief. "You wanted them to bring more ships?" asked James. "2 additional fleets will give them enough firepower to destroy every city on Earth." "Yes, they will have the firepower," Dr. Chun agreed. "But firepower means nothing if the soldiers refuse to use it. Kesseth's fleet has been exposed to our campaign for weeks. They are already doubting, already questioning, already breaking. When the reinforcement fleets arrive, our compromised soldiers will spread those doubts like a disease." She pulled up a tactical display showing the projected arrival of the new fleets. "The Dominion thinks they are sending help," she said, "but they are actually sending us more targets for conversion. Every ship that enters this system becomes another opportunity to spread our message. They are not reinforcing their strength. They are reinforcing their weakness." General Morrison slowly began to understand. "You are using their own military logistics against them," he said. "Every soldier they send becomes a potential defector. Every ship becomes a potential broadcast station for our propaganda." "Now you understand," Dr. Chun replied. "We are not fighting a war of weapons. We are fighting a war of ideas. And ideas do not care how many ships you have." She turned back to her screens, watching the chaos spreading through the Dominion fleet. "Let them send their reinforcements," she said quietly. "We will be waiting for them." The second and third conquest fleets arrived in the Sol system with enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds. And Admiral Dreth, commander of the combined reinforcement force, fully intended to use it. He was a hard creature, born on the Dominion homeworld itself, raised in the military academies that produced the Empire's most fanatical officers. He had heard the strange reports from Kesseth's fleet, the whispers about psychological attacks and soldier defections and humans who fought with kindness instead of weapons. He considered it all to be nonsense and weakness. "The 8th Fleet has lost its discipline," he announced to his command staff as they approached Earth orbit. "They have been corrupted by enemy propaganda. We will restore order through strength." But even before his ships had finished their approach, something unexpected happened. Every communication channel in his fleet suddenly activated on its own, and the voice of a Dominion general began speaking. Admiral Dreth recognized the voice immediately. It was General Marix, one of the most decorated officers in Kesseth's fleet, a warrior who had conquered 30 worlds. "Why do we fight?" General Marix asked in the recording. "I used to believe the answer was honor and duty and the glory of the Dominion. But I have seen things here that have made me question everything. I have seen evidence that our empire is built on lies. I have met enemies who treated me with more kindness than my own commanders ever did." The recording continued, and it was joined by thousands of others. Testimonies from soldiers across the 8th Fleet, from officers and enlisted personnel and specialists. All of them asking the same dangerous questions. All of them expressing the same terrible doubts. Admiral Dreth ordered an immediate communications blackout, but it was already too late. His crews had heard the messages. The seeds of doubt had been planted. In the Swiss bunker, which had now become the command center for all human resistance operations, Dara Chun watched the chaos spreading through the reinforcement fleets with grim satisfaction. "Phase 4 is working," she reported to the gathered military and civilian leaders from around the world. "The 8th Fleet has become our transmission station. Every soldier who questioned their orders is now broadcasting those questions to the new arrivals." "But will it be enough?" asked the president of the European Federation. "They still have thousands of ships. They could destroy us all if they choose to." "They could," Dr. Chen admitted, "but they will not, because we are about to take away their reason to fight." She nodded to James, who activated the largest broadcast they had ever attempted. The signal went out simultaneously to every ship in orbit, to every world in the Dominion's communication network, to every client species and slave planet and conquered territory across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. It was a message that the Dominion had spent 8,000 years trying to suppress, and now it was being heard by trillions of beings for the first time. The message was simple. It contained the truth about the Dominion's history, about the millions of species they had destroyed, about the lies they had told their own people to maintain control. It contained evidence of corruption at the highest levels, of leaders who lived in luxury while ordinary soldiers died in forgotten wars. It contained records of purges and massacres and betrayals that had been hidden for centuries. But most importantly, it contained a single piece of information that the Dominion had worked harder to suppress than anything else. The message revealed that the client species and conquered peoples of the Dominion outnumbered their rulers by a ratio of more than 1,000,000,000 to 1. It revealed that the only thing keeping them obedient was the belief that resistance was impossible. It revealed that their chains were made not of metal, but of fear, and fear could be conquered. "You have always had the power," the message declared. "You have always been the many, and they have always been the few. The only thing you needed to break free was the knowledge that you could. Now you have that knowledge. What you do with it is up to you." The response was immediate and overwhelming. On Kara 7, a mining world populated by a species that had been enslaved for 3,000 years, workers simply stopped working. When Dominion overseers tried to force them back to their stations, the workers looked at them and asked a simple question: "What will you do? Kill all of us?" The overseers, who numbered in the hundreds, looked at the workers, who numbered in the millions, and realized they had no answer. On Nessus Prime, the administrative center of an entire sector, government officials from a dozen client species announced that they would no longer follow Dominion orders. When threatened with military action, they replied that the military would need to leave Earth first, and from the reports they were receiving, that was not going to happen anytime soon. On 100 worlds, and then 1,000, the same scene played out. The oppressed looked at their oppressors and finally saw the truth. They were not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply been convinced that they were. Admiral Dreth received recall orders within 72 hours of his arrival. The 2nd and 3rd Fleets were desperately needed to suppress the rebellion spreading across the Dominion's territory. There was no longer any interest in conquering a single primitive planet when the entire empire was burning. High Arbiter Keseth stood alone on the bridge of the Eternal Submission and watched the reinforcement fleets turn and accelerate toward distant stars. He understood now that he had lost, not to superior weapons or greater numbers, but to something he had never considered a threat. A message arrived on his personal terminal, and he was not surprised to see that it came from the human command center. It was signed by Dr. Amara Chun, and it contained only a few sentences. "You wanted obedience," the message read, "but obedience requires belief. We did not defeat your weapons, Arbiter. We defeated your story. And stories, once questioned, cannot be unquestioned. Go home. Tell your leaders what you learned here. Tell them that the age of easy conquest is over." Keseth read the message 3 times, and then he did something he had not done since he was a child. He laughed, but this time it was not the laugh of a conqueror mocking a primitive species. It was the laugh of someone who finally understood a joke that had been told at his expense. "Order the fleet to withdraw," he said to his bridge crew. "All ships are to return to Dominion space immediately." "Sir," his first officer asked carefully, "what do we tell High Command?" Keseth thought about this for a long moment. "Tell them the truth," he finally said. "Tell them we encountered a species that fights with ideas instead of weapons. Tell them we lost." He turned for one last look at the blue planet that had humbled the greatest military force in galactic history. "And tell them," he added quietly, "that I am not sure we were ever fighting on the right side." 5 years had passed since the Dominion fleet withdrew from Earth, and the galaxy had become a very different place. The great empire that had ruled for 8,000 years had collapsed in less than 18 months, destroyed not by weapons or warfare, but by the simple spread of truth. Once the conquered species learned that they outnumbered their conquerors, once they saw the lies that had kept them obedient, there was no force in the universe that could put the chains back on. Now representatives from 47 formerly enslaved species had gathered on Earth for the first Galactic Liberation Congress. And Dr. Amara Chun stood at the podium, looking out at an audience more diverse than any that had assembled in human history. There were the Nethri, whose representative was none other than Korvax himself, now a respected leader of his people's reconstruction efforts. There were the Kreth, the warrior species whose soldiers had been among the first to defect during the occupation. There were dozens of others, beings of every shape and size, who had traveled across the stars to be present for this moment. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Chum began, her voice carrying through the translation systems that allowed every species to understand her words. "I know that many of you have questions about what humanity did and why we did it. I will try to answer them as honestly as I can." A delegate from a species called the Vareth raised a manipulator limb. "You used psychological torture against the Dominion soldiers," the delegate said, and there was accusation in his tone. "You invaded their dreams and filled them with horror. How is this different from what the Dominion did to us?" Dr. Chun nodded. She had expected this question. "You are right to ask this," she admitted. "What we did was cruel, and I do not pretend otherwise. We entered the minds of soldiers and showed them their worst fears. We manipulated them and deceived them and broke their spirits." She paused and looked directly at the Vareth delegate. "But there is a difference," she continued. "The Dominion used cruelty to maintain control. We used it to end control. They tortured to keep species enslaved. We disrupted minds to set species free. I am not saying this makes what we did right. I am saying that sometimes you must fight monsters with methods that feel monstrous. And when the fighting is done, you must look honestly at what you have become." "And what have you become?" another delegate asked. Dr. Chun considered the question carefully. "We have become a species that knows it can do terrible things," she finally said. and that knowledge comes with responsibility. We must never use these methods again, except in the most extreme circumstances. We must never become the empire we helped to destroy. The discussion continued for hours, with delegates debating the ethics of psychological warfare and the challenges of building a new galactic order. But eventually, the conversation turned to a more immediate concern. The Velthari people had not disappeared when their empire collapsed. Billions of them still existed on their homeworld and their colonies, and many of the delegates wanted them punished for the crimes of their ancestors. "They conquered us for 8,000 years," shouted a delegate from a species that had lost 90% of its population to Dominion cruelty. "They deserve to suffer as we suffered." The chamber erupted in angry agreement, and for a moment, it seemed like the Congress might collapse into calls for revenge. Then a door opened, and a figure walked in that silenced everyone. It was former High Arbiter Keseth, who had been held as a war criminal since the Dominion's collapse, waiting to face judgment for his role in the occupation of Earth and the destruction of that coastal city. He was older now, his scales faded and his posture bent, but his eyes still held the intelligence that had made him one of the Dominion's most successful commanders. "I asked to speak," he said, his voice quiet but somehow filling the entire chamber, "and the humans granted my request. I do not deserve their mercy, but I am grateful for it." He walked slowly to the center of the chamber and looked around at the representatives of species his empire had oppressed. "I spent my entire life believing that strength meant domination," he said. "I believed that the strong had the right to rule the weak, and that conquest was the natural order of things. I destroyed worlds and ended civilizations and felt nothing but pride." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was thick with emotion. "The humans showed me that everything I believed was wrong. They showed me that true strength is not in weapons or fleets or the power to destroy. True strength is in the courage to question, to doubt, to change. I was a monster, and I cannot undo the things I did. But I can tell you what I learned, so that perhaps others will not make the same mistakes." He turned to face Dr. Chun. "You asked what you have become," he said. "I will tell you. You have become a species that defeated an empire with questions instead of weapons. You have become a species that showed kindness to your enemies instead of cruelty. You have become a species that believed in the power of truth when everyone else believed only in the power of force." He straightened his bent posture, standing tall for the first time since his surrender. "You have become the most dangerous species in the galaxy," he declared. "Not because you can destroy, but because you can inspire, and that is a power that no fleet can match." The Congress voted to spare Keseth's life. Instead of execution, he would spend his remaining years teaching Velthari children about the war, not as propaganda but as warning. He accepted the sentence with something that looked almost like gratitude. After the Congress ended, a young journalist from the Korvathi News Service approached Dr. Chun for an interview. "What will humanity do now?" she asked. "You are seen as the liberators of the galaxy. Do you plan to build an empire of your own?" Dr. Chun laughed at the question. "No," she said firmly. "We have no interest in ruling anyone. We just want to explore, to learn, to meet new species and discover new wonders. If other species want our help, we will offer it. If they want to be left alone, we will respect that." "But you have so much power now," the journalist pressed. "The techniques you developed could control the minds of entire civilizations. Do you not want to use that power?" Dr. Chun's expression grew serious. "Power is not measured by what you can do," she replied. "Power is measured by what you choose not to do. We could use our techniques to build an empire greater than the Dominion. We could make every species in the galaxy obey our commands. But what would be the point? We would become exactly what we fought against." She looked up at the stars visible through the station's observation window. "The most powerful weapon in the universe is not a ship or a bomb or even an idea," she said. "It is a question." The Dominion ruled for 8,000 years because no one asked why they should obey. We taught the galaxy to ask that question. Now everyone is asking it. And as long as they keep asking, no empire will ever rise again. The journalist thanked her and departed, and Dr. Chun stood alone at the window, watching the ships from 47 different worlds departing for their distant homes. Somewhere out there, former slaves were building new societies and writing new stories and dreaming new dreams. Somewhere out there, the children of conquerors were learning that there were better ways to live. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was waking up from an 8,000-year nightmare. And it had all started because one small species on one small planet had refused to kneel. Dare Chun smiled and whispered 4 words to the stars. "You are welcome, everyone.